Hello everyone, welcome to Criminal Cases Today. Today, we bring you a case that left a deep impression on a small community and that, after years of mystery, has finally found answers. We are talking about the tragic case of Mandy Stavik, a young woman full of life and dreams who disappeared without a trace in 1989. Her story, full of twists and shocking revelations, shows us how the search for justice can last decades and how, sometimes, the darkest secrets end up coming to light. Get ready for a journey through a criminal case that shook everyone and discover how the past and present intertwine in search of the truth. So stay with us as we explore every detail of this enigma that, for a long time, seemed impossible to solve. Here we go. It was a cold autumn day, November 24, 1989, in the small town of Acme, in the state of Washington. Mandy Stavik, an 18-year-old teenager, was getting ready for her daily run. She pulled on a light, comfortable sweatshirt, teal sweatpants, and her favorite running shoes, light blue with purple stripes, which were a bit worn from her many runs. Before heading out, Mandy grabbed her Walkman. She loved listening to her favorite music as she ran along the trails in Acme, which offered spectacular views of the Cascade Mountains and Lake Whatcom. It was a regular routine for Mandy. She liked to run in the afternoons, when the sun was starting to set and the cool mountain breeze was blowing through the trees. Around 2:30 p.m., Mandy left the house, excited for another workout. Kira, her faithful police dog, ran after her. Kira was a German Shepherd Labrador mix who was trained and always alert to her surroundings. Mandy and Kira were inseparable during these runs. As Mandy walked away from the house, her mother, Mary, saw her leaving through the kitchen window. She waved, a smile plastered on her face. At that moment, Mary had no idea that this would be the last time she would see her daughter. Mandy ran along the trail, her sneakers lightly touching the ground covered in dry leaves, while her favorite songs played on her Walkman. 2 hours passed, and the sky began to darken. Mary looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was strange that Mandy had not returned yet. Her daughter had always been punctual, almost obsessive about her routine. She began to feel a slight uneasiness. Trying to ignore the growing discomfort, Mary continued her tasks, but with each passing minute, her heart beat faster. When almost 3 hours passed and Mandy or Kira had not appeared, Mary knew something was wrong. Her maternal instincts screamed for attention. Then, out of nowhere, Kira appeared at the front door. The dog had her tail between her legs, a very different behavior from her usual. Kira was always full of energy and joy, but now she seemed scared. Mary called for Mandy, but there was no answer. Panic began to take over. She ran to the phone and called Rick, Mandy's boyfriend. Maybe Mandy had gone to his house. Rick answered on the second ring, and his voice was calm, unsure of what was going on. "Hi, Mary," he said. But when Rick heard that Mandy was missing, he fell silent. "She didn't come here, Mary. I haven't seen her today," he replied, his voice now filled with concern. Mary felt a chill run down her spine. Something terrible had happened. Mary called the local sheriff, quickly explaining the situation. The police arrived within minutes, and word spread quickly through the small town. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers began to gather to help with the search. People loved Mandy. She was a kind, smiling girl, always willing to help anyone in need. Witnesses reported seeing Mandy running down the gravel road that led to the trail. One report came from the Anderson's son, who lived halfway between the Stavik house and the main road. He was playing with his friend Jeremy and remembered seeing Mandy walking by, her ponytail swinging as she ran. It was a common sight for him, something that would never arouse suspicion. The search continued late into the night, with flashlights cutting through the darkness of the forest and voices calling Mandy's name. But the night passed without a trace of her. The next day, the search intensified. Detective Ron Peterson took the lead, organizing teams to search every corner of the forest and around the neighborhood. The trail where Mandy used to run was thoroughly searched, but no trace of her was found. Then, 2 days after the disappearance, the search team found something on the side of the main road. It was a pair of dirty, holey green sweatpants. Mary was called to the scene. When she saw the pants, her heart sank. "Those look so different from the ones Mandy wore," Mary said, looking at the worn-out pieces. The pants were sent for analysis, but the results yielded no answers. Nothing on them pointed clearly to Mandy. Time passed painfully slowly for the Stavik family. 27 days after the disappearance, there was still no sign of Mandy. Hope of finding her alive was fading, but Mary, Glenn, and Mandy's siblings refused to give up. "We just wanted her to come home," Mandy's older sister Molly said, tears in her eyes. "We prayed every day, asking God to bring her back." Determined not to leave any possibility unturned, the officers began searching nearby bodies of water. Using a boat borrowed from the fire department, they explored the Nooksack River. Detective Ron led the team. "As we turned a corner and left the main river, we entered a small side channel. That's when something pink caught my eye," Ron later recalled. The question on everyone's mind was, what really happened to Mandy? Did she get lost on the trail and end up in the river? Or did something darker and more sinister happen that afternoon on the way home? These questions echoed in the minds of everyone in Acme, a small town where everyone knew and trusted each other. Today, we remember the story of Mandy Stavik, a case that shook this quiet community and still leaves many unanswered questions. Mandy was born on April 16, 1971, to Glenn and Mary Stavik, and grew up surrounded by the love of her three siblings, Brent, Lee, and Molly. In 1974, Glenn and Mary's marriage ended. They separated and went their separate ways, leaving behind the life they had built together. The change was difficult for the family, but they all tried to adjust to their new reality. However, the following year, an even greater tragedy struck the Staviks. Mandy's older brother, Brent, died in a tragic accident during a hunting trip in Alaska. Brent was only 17 years old, and his loss left a deep void in the family. Brent's death was a devastating blow to Mary, who decided she needed a fresh start for her children and herself. In search of a fresh start, Mary decided to move from Palmer, Alaska, to Acme, a small town in Washington state. With her three children by her side, Mary hoped to find peace and a new life in Acme. Mandy, who was in 7th grade at the time, was forced to adapt to this new life. Although everything was different and unfamiliar at first, Mandy quickly settled into her new surroundings. She was an energetic and friendly girl, always smiling and making friends. It didn't take long for her to become popular in the small town of Acme. In school, Mandy was a model student. She stood out not only for her good grades, but also for her involvement in several extracurricular activities. Mandy had a special talent for music and was a member of the school band, where she played the flute, clarinet, and saxophone. Music was one of her great passions, and she would spend hours practicing in her room, filling the house with soft melodies. In addition to her musical ability, Mandy was a natural athlete. She joined the school basketball team and quickly emerged as a talented player. Her passion for sports didn't stop with basketball, she also played softball and loved horseback riding. Mandy seemed to have a lot of energy, always on the go, always seeking new adventures. Mandy's mother, Mary, was always proud of her daughter. She wanted to do everything and be good at everything, Mary would say with a smile on her face. Mandy was a doer, someone who didn't settle for less. A former teacher of Mandy's remembered her as a determined girl who wanted to do well in everything she did. She had everything going for her, he said. A bright future was ahead of her. The Stavik home was on Strand Road, a quiet, wooded area about a mile off the main road. It was a haven of peace and security, surrounded by nature. About 5 miles from the house was a river known to locals as the Nooksack River. Mandy loved to run along the Acme roads, and one of her favorite routes involved going to the Nooksack River. She enjoyed feeling the cool breeze on her face as she ran, listening to the sound of the water and the birds singing in the trees. Sometimes her mother Mary would accompany her on her bike, and Kira, the family's German shepherd, would run alongside Mandy, always watchful and protective. If you are enjoying the video, like the video so that YouTube always recommends videos like this to you. If you liked the video, let's continue. Mandy graduated from Mount Baker High School with honors, standing out as one of the best students in her class. In addition, she learned sign language, something that made her very happy. Her graduation was a day of great joy for Mary, who could not contain her pride. Mandy always had big dreams and wanted to become a commercial pilot. She imagined the skies as her field of work, exploring the world from above. With this goal, Mandy enrolled at Central Washington University. At 18, full of enthusiasm and hope, she believed that in a few years she would be flying commercial planes. However, after a few months in college, Mandy realized that the life of a pilot was not what she imagined. The idea of spending hours sitting in a cockpit, watching control panels, began to seem monotonous and uninteresting. She realized she needed something more dynamic, something that would make her feel alive. Determined to change her path, Mandy began exploring other possibilities. It was at university that Mandy met Yoko, a Japanese student who would become one of her best friends. Yoko was her roommate, and the two quickly became inseparable. They shared laughs, confidences, and dreams. With Yoko's help, Mandy learned to speak Japanese, a language that fascinated her. Soon, she was speaking fluently with her friend, and the two enjoyed practicing their new language together. In addition to her friendship with Yoko, Mandy was also in a serious relationship with a boy she had met in high school. Their relationship was known and accepted by her friends and family, and Mandy seemed happy. She and her boyfriend were often seen together, and the two made plans for the future. In November 1989, Central Washington University took a break for Thanksgiving, and students had the opportunity to return home. Mandy was eager to see her family again and decided to take Yoko with her to Acme. The two of them traveled together, and when they arrived, the Stavik home was full of joy and laughter. Relatives had come for the holiday, and everyone was delighted to meet Yoko. Mandy introduced her Japanese friend to everyone. As soon as Yoko arrived at Mandy's house, she felt like part of the family. Everyone welcomed her with open arms, and they were soon laughing and chatting as if they were old friends. The house was always lively, with lots of laughter and the delicious smell of food that Mandy's mother, Mary, was cooking in the kitchen. No one could imagine that anything bad could happen in a place so full of life and joy. People were focused on the present moment, enjoying each other's company, and no one worried about what the future might bring. The next day, November 24th, the sun was shining brightly and the weather was pleasant. Mandy and Yoko decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood. Mandy wanted to show her Japanese friend the beautiful places around, like the lush green fields and the river that ran near her home. They walked along the trails that Mandy knew so well, talking and laughing as Mandy pointed out trees, flowers, and small animals that they found along the way. After a while, the two of them returned home and sat down at the table to have a delicious meal. Mary had prepared a feast of roast turkey, mashed potatoes, apple pie, and other delicacies. They ate until they were satisfied, with the sound of laughter and conversation in the background. Around 2 p.m., Mandy got up from the table and announced that she was going for a run. It was a habit she did regularly to keep herself in shape and clear her mind. "I'm going for a run," she said with a smile. Mary, who usually accompanied her, couldn't go this time because she was busy taking care of relatives who had come for Thanksgiving. Yoko also decided to stay home to rest and maybe watch a movie or read a book. Mandy pulled on her sweatshirt and blue running shoes with purple stripes. She grabbed her Walkman and put on her headphones, ready to listen to her favorite music while she ran. "See you soon," she said, waving as she walked out the front door. The family's German shepherd, Kira, followed her, wagging her tail excitedly. Mary looked out the window and saw Mandy and Kira running together down the dirt road. It was a common, heartwarming sight, one that Mary had seen many times before. She never could have imagined that this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Meanwhile, down by the river, the search team was working tirelessly. The officers were looking for Mandy everywhere they could. When they reached a calmer stretch of the river, they spotted something that caught their attention, a pair of colorful sneakers emerging from the water. As they got closer, they realized it was the body of a young woman. She was wearing only the running shoes that Mandy usually wore. Detective Ron, with a heavy heart, waded into the water up to his knees to retrieve the body. He and the other officers placed Mandy in a body bag and took her to the morgue. The news soon reached Mandy's family. Mary received the call that would change her life forever. When she learned that her daughter had been found dead, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Mandy's sister Molly was devastated. "It was like the world stopped," she said, recalling the moment. "I ran out of the house, not knowing where to go. I ran out into the field and all I could do was scream. I screamed at God, asking why this had happened. How could something so horrible have happened to my sister?" The small community where Mandy lived was in shock. It was a peaceful place where everyone knew and trusted each other. The idea that someone could have hurt Mandy was terrifying to everyone. People began to look at each other with suspicion, and suddenly no one felt safe anymore. Many began locking their doors and avoiding going out at night. The men in the village, who had once been friends and neighbors, began to be viewed with suspicion. The detectives knew they had to find out what had happened to Mandy. They carefully examined the area where her body was found, but there were no signs of a struggle. She had a few scratches on her arms that appeared to have been caused by branches or thorns, and a wound on the back of her head. The head wound suggested that she might have been attacked. An autopsy revealed that Mandy had died from drowning. However, the part of the river where she was found was shallow, making it unlikely that she had drowned accidentally. There were also signs that she might have been abused, which led detectives to suspect an assault. Investigators speculated that Mandy might have been kidnapped and then tried to escape. Perhaps her attacker had caught up with her, struck her in the head, and then drowned her in the river. The first person to be investigated was Rick, Mandy's longtime boyfriend. But after questioning him, detectives found nothing to link him to the crime and ruled him out as a suspect. To further their investigation, Detective Ron, who had received training in collecting DNA evidence, was able to collect samples from Mandy's body. These samples were sent to the FBI. Detectives were able to identify the DNA of an unknown male on Mandy's body. This was an important lead, but when they compared this DNA with records in the database, they found no match. This meant that the man responsible had never been arrested or did not have his DNA on file, which made the investigation even more difficult. Determined to solve the case, police began following every possible lead. They had received several tips from well-meaning people, but unfortunately, none of these leads led to a conclusion. It was as if the culprit had disappeared into thin air. Several men were interviewed, and DNA from about 30 of them, all from the Acme area, was collected and analyzed. But despite all the efforts, no matches were found. As time passed, hope began to fade, but no one was ready to forget Mandy. On December 4, 1989, almost a month after her death, a memorial service was held at her former high school, Mount Baker High School. It was a gray day, and the mood seemed to reflect the sense of loss felt by everyone. About 1,000 students, teachers, and community members attended the memorial to pay their respects. The ceremony lasted 2 hours and was marked by tears and emotional words. Mandy's mother, Mary, took the stage to speak. Her voice shaking and filled with pain, she said, "Mandy has always been a fighter. Our philosophy was to turn any bad situation into a lesson, to learn and grow from it. This tragedy is a challenge for me, to live up to it. It hasn't been easy, but I have made some friends along the way." Mary's words deeply touched everyone present, who felt her pain as if it were their own. With no new leads, the case was eventually dropped. Years passed, but the mystery of who had taken Mandy's life was never forgotten. In 2009, 2 decades after Mandy's death, a new detective was assigned to the case. Kevin, a seasoned and determined investigator, took it upon himself to revisit all of the evidence and interviews. He decided to start from scratch, reviewing every detail and every person who had been interviewed. It was during this thorough review that Kevin discovered something that had seemingly gone unnoticed. He found a reference to a man named John Wisneski, a drug dealer who had been questioned previously about Mandy's case. At the time, John had claimed that he knew who had killed Mandy, but for some reason, the police had been unable to get any more information from him. Kevin decided it was time to talk to John again and find out what he really knew. John, however, was no longer living in the United States. He had moved to Cambodia, a country in Southeast Asia. Determined to follow every lead, Kevin traveled to Cambodia to find John and question him. But despite his efforts in the long journey, Kevin came up empty-handed. John had nothing new to offer, and his DNA still did not match the DNA found on Mandy's body. Once again, it seemed like the case was at a dead end. Then, something completely unexpected happened 3 years later. In June 2013, 2 women who lived near Bellingham, a town about a 35-minute drive from Acme, decided to take their children to play at the local park. Mary Lee Anderson and Heather Backstrom did not know each other well, but that day, as they watched their children play, they began to talk. They talked about their families, their children, and soon the subject turned to the unsolved Mandy case, which still haunted the memories of many people in the area. It was then that Heather made a startling revelation. She said she knew who had killed Mandy. Mary Lee, stunned, replied that she also knew who was responsible. The two women barely knew each other, but during their conversation, they discovered that they had something in common. They both had suspicions about the same man, Timothy Bass. If you've made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any criminal cases. We post videos every Monday and Friday. If you've already subscribed, let's continue. Intrigued by the fact that they had both come to the same conclusion, Mary Lee and Heather began to share their experiences with Timothy. Mary Lee told a frightening story. Timothy was a friend of her husband's, and one night, while Mary Lee was home alone with her young son, Timothy showed up, saying he needed to use the phone. After trying to call without success, Timothy went to the room where Mary Lee was and told her, bluntly, that he wanted to stay with her. Mary Lee was shocked by his audacity and threatened to call the police if he didn't leave. Timothy persisted for a while, but in the end, Mary Lee managed to make him leave. The experience was so disturbing that Mary Lee never forgot it. Heather, on the other hand, had a strange encounter with Timothy when she was just 15 years old. It happened in the summer of 1989, just a few months before Mandy disappeared. After a softball game, Heather and some friends went to a Dairy Queen ice cream shop. Heather was sitting in the front seat of a pickup truck, between Timothy and a friend named Dan. During the ride, Timothy began flirting aggressively with Heather, making her uncomfortable and scared. Heather recalls a particularly uncomfortable moment with Timothy. One afternoon after a softball game in the summer of 1989, she and some friends went to a Dairy Queen. Timothy was in the front seat of a pickup truck, which was being driven by a man named Dan. During the ride, Timothy began flirting aggressively with Heather. He made comments about her eyes and tried to touch her knees, which were visible because she was wearing cut-off sweatpants. Timothy took a pen out of the cup holder and began rubbing it on her knees. Heather became extremely uncomfortable, and despite her attempts to keep the situation under control, Timothy would not move away. Only Dan's presence behind the wheel eventually caused Timothy to give up his advances, but Heather was scarred by the experience and began avoiding Timothy whenever she could in the neighborhood. After sharing these disturbing experiences with Mary Lee, both women became even more convinced that Timothy knew something about Mandy's disappearance. Mary Lee, who had known Detective Ken Gates since high school, decided to look for him. She was anxious and nervous, worried that her suspicions might not be true. In a small town like Acme, accusing someone without solid evidence could have serious consequences. Still, she decided to file a complaint. Detective Gates, known for his meticulous work, and his team began investigating Timothy. They discovered that although Timothy had no criminal record, there were some disturbing details. In 1989, the year Mandy disappeared, Timothy and his family lived in a house that was directly on the route Mandy took for her daily runs. Their house was strategically located along Mandy's favorite route, which caught the attention of investigators. Timothy's family was well known and respected in the community, and Timothy had even attended the same high school as Mandy. In January 1990, shortly after Mandy disappeared, Timothy married Gina Malone and moved to Everson, a quiet town about 20 miles north of Acme. They started a family and had 3 children, with Timothy working as a delivery boy at a bakery called FR Bakery Outlet. Their life seemed to be going on normally and peacefully. However, the fact that Timothy and the men in his family had not provided DNA samples for the investigation increased the detective's suspicions. Determined to follow up on this new lead, the officers went to Timothy's house. When they got there, they spoke to him about Mandy, but the way Timothy behaved and his lack of recollection of the young woman were alarming. Detective Kevin noted that it was impossible for someone in a small town like that not to know about Mandy, especially someone who lived so close to where she ran every day. Timothy's lack of knowledge seemed suspicious. The detectives then asked Timothy to provide a saliva sample for DNA testing, but he refused. Timothy claimed not to trust the police's intentions and expressed concerns that giving his DNA could lead to future problems, citing cases he had seen on TV where people were arrested after providing samples. This behavior only made the detectives more suspicious. Although they could not force Timothy to cooperate, they decided to monitor him more closely from that point on. Additionally, the detectives went to the FR Bakery Outlet bakery where Timothy worked and spoke to the manager, a woman named Kim. Kim was the manager of a local bakery where Timothy worked. One day, the detectives arrived at the bakery with an important mission. They wanted to collect a DNA sample from Timothy. But they didn't tell Kim exactly what they were investigating. They only mentioned that they were checking some employees in connection with a mysterious case and that they needed an item that might have Timothy's DNA on it, like a cigarette butt or something similar. Kim was concerned and felt that this task was beyond her responsibilities. So she directed the detectives to the bakery's human resources department. However, the detectives encountered yet another obstacle. The owner of the bakery, upon learning what the investigation was about, decided not to help. He demanded a search warrant or a subpoena to turn over any evidence, and the detectives didn't have enough evidence at the time to get one. The detectives were discouraged, but they knew they had to continue the investigation. Mandy's case had been on hold for a while, which was very frustrating for everyone involved. In 2017, Kim, who now had a young daughter, was talking to friends and family at home. During the conversation, Mandy's case came up and Kim remembered that detectives had gone to the bakery a few years earlier, asking about Timothy. It was then that Kim decided she had to help in any way she could. She remembered that Timothy always had a habit of taking the trash home and wearing gloves while working, which made it very difficult to find evidence. Still, Kim was determined to help the detectives solve the case. A few weeks later, Timothy made a mistake. He threw away a soda can. Kim was watching and saw the can being discarded. Her heart began to race as she ran to grab the can before it was thrown away. Oh my God, this really happened. Kim thought, feeling like she was doing something important. Kim handed the can to the detectives, who were relieved and excited to finally have some solid evidence. They sent the can to the crime lab, where technicians would analyze the sample for Timothy's DNA. Then it was just a matter of waiting for the lab results. When Detective Kevin received the news, his heart leapt with joy. He knew that after so many years of investigation and mystery, Mandy's case was about to find a solution. On December 12, 2017, detectives went to Timothy's place of work and arrested him right there. He was accused of having harmed Mandy and cruelly taking her life. During questioning, Timothy defended himself by saying that he and Mandy had a secret relationship. According to him, that was the reason his DNA was found with Mandy was because they had met a few hours before she disappeared. Mandy's family was horrified by this claim. Mandy's sister Molly was blunt. There is no way my sister could have had a relationship with him. He was completely out of her league, she said with great conviction. Despite Timothy's claims, the case went to trial. His lawyers tried everything they could to have the DNA evidence thrown out, arguing that the way detectives had collected the evidence violated his rights. But, to the investigators' relief, the judge ruled that the DNA evidence would be admitted at trial. Meanwhile, Timothy's wife Dina filed for divorce, which only added to the tension in the case. The trial began in May 2019 and lasted 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, Timothy's lawyers tried to convince the court that he was innocent. However, several witnesses, including Timothy's younger brother Tom, testified against him. Tom revealed that Timothy had told him while he was under investigation that he had met with Mandy years ago. Timothy had even asked Tom to lie to the police. Tom also told of an incident where Timothy had asked his mother to lie, claiming that they were out shopping at the time Mandy disappeared. These revelations were shocking and incredibly important to the case. Despite all of this evidence and testimony, Timothy's lawyers tried to justify his actions, but the jury was not fooled. On May 24, 2019, Timothy was found guilty and sentenced to 27 years in prison. For Mandy's family, this sentence brought much-needed relief. Mandy's mother, Mary, who had given up hope that the case would ever be solved, was finally able to feel some peace. We finally have some closure. The man who did this is going to spend many years in prison. Even if he ever gets out, his life is pretty much over, Mary said, with a mixture of sadness and relief. Although the life of Mandy, a young woman with so many dreams and contagious energy, ended so sadly and prematurely, knowing that justice was served brought some comfort to her family. They were able to see that, despite the difficulties, everyone's efforts were rewarded. So, what did you think of Mandy Stavic's case? It was an intense and painful journey, but also an example of how justice can finally prevail, even after years of uncertainty. If you were as impacted as I was, leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the case. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to Criminal Cases Today so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Your subscription and support are essential for us to continue bringing you these intriguing and important stories. Thank you for watching, and until the next episode, where we will bring you more cases that will touch your mind and touch your heart. See you soon.